Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. In this video, it's all about the state of Oregon, and these get pretty crazy. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. I'm from Oregon, and I've only had one thing that's really scary ever happen to me. It involves a Ouija board. So this was several years ago, a long time ago. I was 15 years old. I was in my scene goth wannabe phase. I was thinking Ouija boards were cool and edgy. My mom didn't really care or really believe in this kind of stuff. So she went and got me a shitty glow-in-the-dark board from Walmart, I think. My uncle was into spooky stuff too. We are both stupid, and we decided to use it one night when my mom was out working night shift. After a lot of screwing around and trying to ask some basic questions like, are there any dead people here? Are there any spirits? Blah blah, that kind of stuff. Eventually, it says that there is one. We ask its name. It says its name is Steve T. And we think, alright buddy, I'm starting to get just a tiny bit scared, but I kind of also think that my uncle is just screwing with me. I was trying to laugh it off, trying to be like, oh, you really got me there. But then while we're up getting drinks, I hear scraping coming from the room that the board was in. We go back, and the planchette is moving by itself. I think, F that. My uncle tells me that we have to keep playing until the spirit says goodbye, or else it will get angry. And I think, damn it. I'm too much of a baby. It's too spooky for me, so I say no. My uncle goes outside and throws away the board. We decide to stay up and watch movies to keep our mind off it. This whole time, my uncle never leaves my side. He doesn't go to the bathroom or anything. He only goes out to the garage to smoke. After a long time, we decide to finally go to bed. My uncle goes into his room. Not 5 seconds later, I hear him yell, and he runs out of his room. His face is as pale as a sheet. I ask what's wrong, and he says that he's not sleeping in there, that he doesn't want to sleep in there. We camp out in the living room, but I stay up all night, tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. Again, my uncle never leaves my side. He only went into his room for that 5-second period, if that, at most. Now the next day, my mom gets home. My uncle tells her what happened, tells her to go look in his room at the windowsill. I go with her, curious as to what happened. On the windowsill, in deep, deep cut marks, is carved Steve T. And I think, F that. My uncle didn't sleep in his room for weeks and was really nervous and pale the whole time. After a couple months, I was cleaning out a closet and I found the Ouija board still in the packaging, unopened. How did it get back in there? We used it. What the hell? So I've been a fan of cryptid sightings and the like for many years, and I've occasionally done some internet research on them, but I've never investigated them any further than that. As an Oregonian, I'm used to a lot of Bigfoot talk, but I never pay it much attention. I'm confident that if I ever saw one, I probably wouldn't be around to talk about it, but I digress. For the last few weeks, I've been hearing some very bizarre noises outside of my window, along with having a very uneasy feeling of being not watched, since nothing can see me, but being observed. I haven't seen anything yet. I never wanted to look outside, but it still unnerves me. I live in a town of about 15,000 people, about 25 miles northwest of Portland, along the Columbia. It's at the northern end of town, and there are plenty of woods and swamps near the Columbia River. I've lived in this house for about 6 months, and I've never had any issues. I've also just lived north of here years ago, and had no strange experiences there either. The area that I'm in is decently populated. I have seen deer outside of the house, along with other common animals like coyotes, raccoons, and the dreaded skunk. I keep my window open, and other assorted critters. I'm used to hearing some of these guys running around, but the last few weeks have been different. I start getting an uneasy feeling late at night. Coincidentally, this happens when it is absolutely silent outside. I live near roads and Highway 30, so usually I'd expect to hear some traffic. There's always some punk kid revving an engine or a log truck blaring down the highway. When I get these eerie feelings, it's silent. Even when it rains, it seems like it softly sets itself on the ground to not disturb anything. This feeling doesn't diminish after a few minutes of me noticing the silence. I usually hear something walking or shuffling outside of my window. My window faces the gravel driveway. I also know that something is out there because we have a motion light that triggers when someone gets about halfway up the driveway. I can barely see the light through the small gaps between my blinds and the window frame, but the silence and the eerie feeling are the most unsettled I've ever felt. And I've been hunting, and I've been stalked by a cougar, but the sounds also sound like bipedal steps, and I swear that I've heard low, muttering, clicking sounds. The steps move possibly 5 to 6 audible steps, and then stop for a few minutes at a time, and then begin again. Now we have our share of meth heads out here, and I'm pretty sure that a neighbor or two partake, but this is different. A meth head isn't so unnerving, nor are they so patient. Does any of this sound like these crawlers that people talk about? Has anyone in the area ever had encounters like this? I've read many stories, and they're very similar to what I experienced, but I find it really weird that it happened in a populated area. I haven't seen it yet, and I don't want to. That being said, this town also has a famous haunted hotel and restaurant, so the paranormal obviously doesn't discriminate. The Pacific Northwest is full of old Indian legends, and it's not uncommon to hear a lot of ghost stories concerning them. I have one that I'd love to tell you all. It's a personal story that has affected my family for generations. My grandpa was an avid hunter and hiker when he was young. You could not have named a trail that he hadn't hiked or a spot on Mount Hood that he hadn't hunted. He was a master marksman. Being part of the Comanche tribe, his father had expected him to be capable with a gun. During the second week of deer season, well into October, my grandpa set up camp in what is known as the Western Oregon Unit. Out by Wattom Lake and the Pacific Crest Trail, he decided that he would scout around the area for a bit to find a good draw that he could nestle down into the next day. As he was hiking, he ended up an hour away from camp when he ran into 2 other hunters. It was a father and son team that usually hunted the area with black powder rifles. As soon as they saw him, they waved him over and then warned him that the night before they had stumbled upon a bunch of deer down in the valley. They shot one. It was a nice-sized 6-point buck, only to wake up the next morning to find that the deer had been carried off by something. They warned that a bear was probably wandering down in the valley and to be careful if he decided to hunt deer there. He assured them that he would, and he thanked them for the tip-off, and he headed back up the trail to his camp. Having decided that he would hunt the valley, my grandpa spent much of the next day hiking down into the valley. It had been a full moon the night prior, so the deer had all night to graze and would most likely be spending the day bedding down in the tall grass or tree clusters. Around mid-afternoon, he had reached the bottom of the valley, and he had found signs that the group of deer was still in the area. While wading through some tall grass, he spooked a lone forked horn. It wasn't much, but as it was getting late, he decided to take the shot and dropped it at the edge of the clearing. He field dressed the deer and managed to hang it up between two trees in a makeshift camp that he had made near the edge of the clearing, but deep enough that he could no longer see the field. He built a fire and gathered enough firewood to last through the night. My grandpa had dozed off next to the fire, only to be awoken by a large crack. He bolted upright to see night had fallen, and across the fire sat a large creature. It had a massive fur pelt draped over its body. The creature's face was that of a withered, tired old man with a long gray beard. His eyes were a bright orange color, a color like that of a butterfly. He was massive and sat hunched on his feet, staring across the fire at my grandpa, who sat staring back. They sat staring at each other for hours, until the fire began to die. The creature's stare never left my grandpa, but as the flames shrank, the creature slowly leaned over the fire, his mouth opening, revealing bear-like teeth. My grandpa quickly threw another log onto the fire, and the creature sat back, still staring into my grandpa's eyes. As the night went on, my grandpa started to become tired and began having trouble keeping his eyes open. He closed his eyes for what only seemed like a second, but when he opened them, the fire was dying and the creature was leaning over the fire, smiling, almost on top of him. When he quickly threw another log on, the creature sat back on its haunches. Its stare intensified. They continued this stare for several more hours, until the creature finally broke eye contact and looked into the sky. The sun was cresting over the mountains. It stood up, walked towards the deer which hung between the trees, untied it, and threw it over its shoulder. The creature then turned and gave my grandpa one last hateful stare before it returned to the remaining darkness of the forest. So I'll be the first to say that all of this could have happened inside of my head. The mind is a freaky thing that can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. So here we go. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me that in life, you should not be scared of ghosts. Fear the living because they can actually hurt you. And in my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father, unfortunately, ended his own life, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set out to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer, and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things that were going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car that he had willed to me to the cabin. Now this was our family cabin that my parents rented throughout the year when we were not using it. I had the keys to the cabin, and I also had the code for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but I felt the need to mention it anyways. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in, aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes. With my dog as company, DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content, and I started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent in either the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms, and I always kept the doors leading to them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creep me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he has also since passed. I was playing games and watching DVDs. That day was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car, and I decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins, aside from these 2, were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Tall. This is important later on. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. So that's enough background. I'm going to jump to the weirdness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like the footprints in the snow. They were all around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had just been out there in the last 20 or 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me, and maybe I just didn't notice. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Whatever. The prints led away from my cabin, and they disappeared in the snow toward the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints. I went back inside. Nighttime eventually came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog, Midnight, was laying in the bed with me, when suddenly I noticed his ears perk up to a standstill, listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out, not gonna lie. I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. My thought was, shit, well, fine. I couldn't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up toward the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted to, he sat himself down and stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright. I thought that maybe there were some forest animals out there that he wanted to chase down, but I did not want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside, and we both headed back upstairs. Around a half an hour later, I was laying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps. I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof. Maybe a kind-hearted forest animal was running around. But there's one thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart, like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. And I thought, alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and my shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and I went out onto the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and I started canvassing the roof with my light, but there was nothing there. The snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Maybe it was all in my head. But what about Midnight hearing the noises too? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. Now what's coming next is the part of all this that still makes me kind of shake and makes my heart beat hard just thinking about it or telling it to people. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. And that's when I saw it. It was in a tree that was a little taller than our cabin, and about 20 feet from the balcony. I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between the two branches. It was squatted, one on each branch. Its arms were extended above its head, holding on to the branch above it. I thought, F me, what is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and I stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and I pulled Midnight in with me. Once outside, I locked the door, shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and I retreated back to bed. But later on in the night, I heard tapping on the screen door, like somebody was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent, and it didn't stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not to do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed there where I was. Eventually, I passed out and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week that I spent there was non-eventful and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit it could have been all in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time and I was really screwed up from all the drama. But yeah, that's my story. So, those encounters were pretty crazy, weren't they? If you had one that jumped out to you, one that you liked the most, let me know which one it was down in the comments. If you have one of your own, or if you would like to donate to the channel, there's links in the description below. And one random funny thing is that when I was in middle school, we had to pick a US state that we were going to do a project on. We did this for Canada as well as Europe and maybe Africa, I don't remember. But I mainly remember the US one because a girl picked Oregon and she would say it as Oregon, and no amount of telling her it wasn't said that way would deter her from saying it like that. I just thought that was kind of a funny memory, and in my head, whenever I see Oregon, it just lives rent-free. I just say Oregon in my head. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please feel free to like and subscribe. And you can donate to the channel with Super Thanks, PayPal, and Patreon. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. I hope you have a good week, and yeah, thank you for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching.